Hello, welcome back to Sewing with Sin. It is September right now, and if you follow me on Instagram, you might know that I started a little challenge for myself and for the sewing community to slow down for the month of September and really do some intentional sewing. And one of my personal goals for September was to work on a pattern or two, whatever I could fit in the month, that has been sitting in my pattern drawer for a year or longer. I don't know about you, but I get really tempted to buy new patterns as soon as they come out, even if it's not anything that was on my to-do plan. And so this month, I really wanted to set the intention to not buy anything new and go back and look at some old things. And so I'm working right now on the peppermint pocket skirt pattern. This is by Paper Theory. It was like a partnership with Peppermint magazine. And I've had this pattern for over a year. And it's been on my to-do list because I was really noticing some gaps in my wardrobe, and skirts have been something that I've been wanting to work on, and pants. Now I haven't gotten to pants yet, not elastic waist pants. I'm talking about like zip up or button fly pants. And so that's gonna be later on, but right now I'm focusing on skirts. So what I wanted to share in this video is showing you how I work on a new pattern and how I make a toile. I think that's how you say it. I hope that's how you say it. I know it's a French word. Basically, I'm making a practice garment just to focus on fitting issues before I work on the actual garment. Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to share two things. First of all, this pattern, you can print it at home and tape it together, or you can use an A0 format and get it printed at a copy shop. And that's what I did. I printed it at a copy shop, and then I went through the size chart and selected my size. I'm working with a size 14, and then I cut out all the pattern pieces. So that's something that you're not gonna see me do in this video. The second thing that I wanted to share is when I'm working on a toile, I am not using fabric that I paid for or fabric that is valuable to me. And that's really important because you're going to be making alterations. You could use fabric that you like, but if the pattern doesn't fit the way that you want it to, you're going to end up with a garment that doesn't fit you right. And then on top of that, you're probably going to be disappointed that you used your nice fabric. So typically what I do is I go to a thrift store and I buy white sheets or cream sheets, and that's what I'll use for my toile. One last thing. This is not a sew along or a tutorial for how to make this skirt. And the reason why I'm not going through the entire pattern is because I found two other really good sew alongs on YouTube. And so I'm gonna link them in the description below. But this is just me sharing how I work through adjustments and how I fit things to my body to get a just right fit. So that is the purpose of what I'm sharing today, and I hope that you find it useful. And if you make toiles and you do different things than I do, feel free to share in the comments. I am not a professional by any means. I am self-taught, and so the things that I'm sharing here are things that either I've learned from the community or from other YouTubers, or it's just things that I figured out along the way and it works for me. So I hope that you'll find this useful, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, so I've got my pattern pieces cut out, and I typically use a washable marker or a piece of tape to label each part of the pattern. So these are the back and the front pieces of the skirt, and so I don't get things confused. Whenever I'm trying a pattern for the first time, I always write it out. So back and front or top and bottom, things like that, so you're not getting confused, especially when you're trying something new. It helps me. So this is the first thing that I'm doing to get ready to work with my toile. And then I'm double checking to make sure I have all my pattern pieces. And and that I've marked all of my notches. So on this pattern, you can see these are what the notches look like. And I just grab a pair of scissors and snip into the side seam just a tiny bit. These notches are really important. They help you know where to line pieces up, so front and back, or a pocket. This would help guide you. So make sure that you mark that either with a marking tool or with scissors. And the next thing that I do when I'm working on a toile is I set my stitch length to be a really long stitch length. For me, that's a 5 millimeters. I think that's what it is on my machine. And the reason why you typically want to use a wider stitch is because you might be unpicking things, or you might just want to take apart something and put it back together, especially if you're trying this pattern for the first time. And then also to help with unpicking or if you're undoing something when you're working with a toile is don't backstitch at the beginning and don't backstitch at the end. So here I am at the end of the garment and I'm gonna avoid backstitching and just continue a regular stitch length. That way, again, if I need to unpick or if I need to redo this side seam, it's just a lot faster. It's a lot easier to unpick it if you're not adding any back stitches to it. And then if you see a step like edge stitching in your instructions, that's also something you can skip when you're working on a toile. It's kind of like a finishing piece of the garment. And so I know that I can avoid this and just save time. So I'm moving on from that step. And also, I'm not going to finish any of the side seams, so you might use a zigzag stitch or a serger to finish it, but because again, this is a practice garment, I'm not going to finish any of those edges and I'm just going to leave it raw like that. And this is the waistband of the garment, and you can see that some of my stitches are not accurate. They fall a little bit off the waistband into the skirt maybe, and it's just a little sloppy right here, but I am not a perfectionist when I'm working on my toile. So things like this are not super important. If it's not super accurate, the stitch line, that's okay. All right, so I'm on one of the last steps, inserting the elastic into the waistband. Um, and I cut the elastic to the length that the size chart recommended for my size. And I want to insert it all the way into the waistband and try it on to make sure that the elastic band is the right length for me. And I'm going to insert it all the way through, and I'm not going to sew it in or close the seams or anything. You'll see in just a second. All I do is add a safety pin to close it, and then I'm going to get ready to try it on and see if the fit is good. So now that I have it on my body, I'm gonna check the waistband first. And as you can see, it's very stretchy. And so I've decided that I'm going to take out about 1.5 to 2 inches of that band. And I'm just gonna take it off of the skirt and obviously reuse it for the real garment that I'm gonna make after this. And so that's good to know. That's something that I will note for the future when I make this pattern again, that the waistband was just a little too big for me. Okay, and then something else that I'm checking now that I've checked that are the pockets, because the pockets can be raised or lowered, and when I put my hands into the pocket, I can feel they're just a little too low for me, and it's probably because I'm short. I have a very short torso. They're also, you could see that they're kind of like wide, and this is the design of the skirt, for the pockets to kind of hang out and sag a little bit. But because I have such a short torso, I just don't really like that the way that looks. Um, and so I'm going to do a few adjustments here. I'm going to raise the pocket a little bit higher, and I'm also going to figure out a way to just flatten it a little bit so it's not hanging so much out on the sides. You could see it's puckering out a lot, and some folks might like that style. I want it to be a little bit closer to the skirt. So that's another thing that I'm just going to make a note of. So when I make my next version, that's an adjustment that I'm going to make. Okay, so in order to do that adjustment, I'm putting my hands in my pockets and just feeling where it feels like it should be. And right now my hand is barely hitting the bottom of the pocket. So I'm gonna get a ruler and a marking tool, and I'm gonna figure out how much higher I need to raise it. And I think I raised it by about an inch. It looks like an inch right there. And then just mark where that spot is at so I can remember when I start working with the pattern, I'm going to make that adjustment to the pattern itself. Next, I have to work on the length of this skirt. You could see it's really long. This is not the intended design. I think the design was to be a little bit higher on the ankle. Right now, you see I just pinned it to hem it a little bit, and for me, it's still a little long. So I went ahead and just rolled it all the way up to where I wanted the skirt to hit, which is just below the knee. And then again, I take a ruler and I measure whatever that amount was. For me, I think it was about 4 inches or 3.5 inches. And then I'm going to mark that on the skirt and mark that because I'm going to be changing that on the pattern as well. Now, everything that I just mentioned, what I always do is I write it either on the pattern or I write it in my sewing journal, all of the notes that I just took as I was fitting it. So the pocket's going to be raised, the skirt length is going to be raised by 4 inches, and then the elastic waistband, I was going to take off a few inches from that. So whatever I did, I always make sure to write it down, make note of that. And then I'm going to start making those alterations to the actual paper pattern itself. And these are the tools that I always use when I'm making changes to a pattern. I need a pencil, tape, a ruler, and some scissors. And I'm first going to cut on the pocket line. This is the raise or shorten line on the pattern. Um, and then I'm going to use my grid mat that you see, the black mat that's underneath. I'm going to use that grid to help me determine the length that I'm going to be adding or taking away. But before I do that, what I should have done before I cut this was extend the grain line. So do you see that really long line with the arrows? That is the grain line, and that's an important line because when you're cutting and retaping, you're going to need that line to make sure that everything lines up evenly. So I'm just taking my ruler and a pencil and extending that grain line all the way to the top part of the panel right there. And there it is right there. And now I'm ready to start shifting the pattern over to shorten the pocket. All right, and now I'm going to get ready to raise the pocket by, for me, it was 1 inch that I needed to make that adjustment. So I'm throwing a few pattern pieces there just to hold down the bottom piece of that pattern. And then I'm measuring the 1 inch and I'm just marking it with a pencil. You don't have to do that if you're using the grid underneath. And then I'm just going to shift the pattern up by that inch and making sure that that line is still lined up. And then I can tape it in place. So I'm making sure too that where the grain line is at, that is lined up. And you're going to notice that on the top part of the pattern, right where I'm taping it right now, it's not going to be lined up evenly anymore now that you've shifted the pattern. So what I need to do is smooth out that edge right there. And I'm just going to take a pencil and even out the little area that's poking out right there. It doesn't have to be perfect. You could use a curved ruler if you wanted to, but for me it's such a minor change that I'm just going to snip off that little edge. And now you can see it smoothed out, and I'm just adding a piece of tape. And now I'm going to work on the next alteration. And on this piece, you can see I've already cut along the cut and lengthen line, and I'm just preparing to raise it by an inch. What I wanted to show you is on this piece, the grain line is in the middle of the pattern piece. It's not on the edge of the pattern piece. So I've cut it right along the shorten and lengthen line, just like I did before on the other pattern piece. And then I'm marking the change and where I want to raise or lower it. And then when I raise and lower, I want to make sure that I'm lining up the grain line of the top piece and the bottom piece. So you're going to see that the sides of that pattern piece are not going to line up, but the grain line should line up. And then after I've taped it in place, you can see that these sides are not lining up. And again, I'm just going to smooth it out. You could use a curved ruler, or you can just kind of use those other size lines to guide you. And that's what I'm doing here, just kind of shading and evening everything out. And then I'm just going to trim those two little pieces off. And now the last thing I'm working on is the hem of the skirt, and I'm just making sure that I'm lining it up evenly with my grid on my mat. And I'm going to measure up 4 inches and draw a straight line across the skirt, and then I'm going to cut it and move the bottom hem up. And because I want to maintain the integrity of the hem line, which is like a slight curve on the bottom, I'm choosing to cut and then move that piece up instead of just cutting a straight hem across. Then I went ahead and drew another straight line an inch below where I want the hem to be, and that's where I'm actually going to cut it, because you'll see in a second I'm going to take this piece and move it all the way up to that original line where I want the hem to be. So I'm scooting it all the way up and shrinking that hem line by 4 inches, and then I'm going to tape it in place. And then I'm going to trim off that extra length that was below the hemline that I just drew. And just like I did earlier, you need to trim off the extra side seam that hangs over and tape everything in place. And now that all the final adjustments have been made, I can use this pattern for my final garment with my nice fabric. And here it is, my final garment. I ended up using a thrifted tablecloth that I had dyed naturally over the summer, and I am so happy with the fit. The length is perfect now, the pockets are raised, the elastic waist is a little bit tighter, and the fit all around is so much better than the first version. And I hope this encourages you to try making a toile if you haven't and getting a just right fit. I promise spending time on it will really be worth it. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you found it helpful, and subscribe.